Hey everyone, if you haven't heard yet, Terrence Howard recently went back on Joe Rogan's podcast, and this time he was joined by Eric Weinstein, who was brought on to discuss Terry's ideas. What resulted was 4 hours of comedy gold, so let's poke through for some highlights, shall we? Now, Eric and his brother Brett are famous for being charlatans as well, so much so that they each deserve an episode unto themselves, but that will have to wait for another day. Here, I'm just going to highlight some idiotic things that Terry says, and point out how Eric, for the most part, fails to explain precisely how idiotic they are in a way that the audience can understand. He does try to make it clear that most of what Terry says is wrong, it's simply that he remains unreasonably charitable because he places a higher premium on attracting credulous viewers to his own following than offering a firm voice of reason. That Joe decided on Eric to fact-check Terry is just another in a long string of disappointments, so I suppose we should stop being surprised at this point. But it really is sad that he couldn't ask some well-spoken mathematics or chemistry graduate student instead of continuing to platform these types. Such is life. Let's get into the chaos.
What out of the podcast that I did with Terrence really stood out with you or something that you wanted to?
Well, what I thought is, I have to be honest. I've been listening. I was not so happy with certain things that happened in the podcast. And then I started hearing the response to it. And I was much more infuriated by the response than anything I heard in the podcast, because I thought that a lot of people just used their position of greater formal education in some of these areas to be jerks and to be really dismissive and pretend that they couldn't understand things that you were saying.
This will set the tone for the conversation, that Eric is more offended by educated people correcting the insane gibberish that Terry spews than the actual insane gibberish that Terry spews. Tells you everything you need to know about who Eric is and his motivations for appearing on this program.
But they got upset that I'm talking about the foundational problems associated with mathematics that's held us back.
But I think if people really care about these ideas, though, what they should do is talk about the ideas. It's the personal attacks that are attached to the ideas by people that want to be taken seriously. It fucks the whole thing up. Because, either you're correct or you're incorrect. Tell me what you think is right.
And, of course, all of these clowns pretend that the people who have been debunking Terry are just shouting insults and nothing else, instead of specifically explaining how all of his ideas are objectively wrong using language a child could understand. This is textbook denial, and it's the only card they have. The well-deserved insults follow the debunking. They are not in place of it.
I want to offer to you, I want to be able to show you the things that I tried to show Neil deGrasse Tyson that he would not even really take a look at and to see.
But no, he did take a look at it, right? He responded in a long video recently.
Yeah, but his response was disingenuous.
No, his response was not disingenuous. It was the most genuine, flattering, and diplomatic response imaginable to the flaming pile of crazy you threw at him. Again, denial, the only card he has. But we will come back to Neil a bit later.
I don't think Neil actually understood some of your ideas, to be entirely honest.
No, and what he forgot is when I say 1 × 1 = 2, that's a metaphor for challenging the status quo.
Oh, it was just a metaphor, you guys. After having thousands of people mock him everywhere he goes for not understanding second-grade arithmetic, he's decided that he wasn't serious at all. He was just speaking metaphorically. But really, though, it seemed like the centerpiece of all his bullshit.
Despite the fact that the square root of 2 has all of its issues when you cube it or you multiply it by 2, which creates a contradiction. Despite the fact that the square root of 2 has a problem with the prime numbers, the fact that they call number 2 a prime number, when it's clearly a composite number.
And of course, he immediately explains that it wasn't a metaphor at all, he just can't do basic math. No, Terry, 2 is a prime number because it's a number that is only divisible by 1 and itself. How would it be a composite number? What are its factors? 1 and itself? Yeah, that's the definition of a prime number. Off to a bad start.
2, it does belong as a prime, but it is also special. And in other words, I have the opportunity to strawman you if I want to, because what you just said sounded crazy.
What Terry said was objectively crazy, and Eric should be telling him that he's clueless. There is no straw man. Terry is pretending that 2 isn't a prime number, and it objectively is. Eric at the very least confirms that 2 is a prime number. There's nothing special about it other than that it is a very small positive integer. It's not large enough to have factors other than 1 and itself. Same with 3. Only once we get to 4 do we have a number that's large enough to have a factor other than 1 in itself. It's not that hard to understand.
You know, if you say 1 times 1 equals 2, everybody knows that that's crazy. But what you actually may mean, and what the fact that you don't use certain terms or the fact that you use certain pronunciations that communicate to me something very positive, which is that you taught yourself. You learned this stuff from reading about it because nobody taught you, or you wouldn't pronounce certain words the way you pronounce them.
Eric is saying that 1 times 1 equals 2 is crazy. He is saying that Terry can't even pronounce the words he uses. So why are we having such a hard time admitting the bottom line here, that Terry is crazy and has no clue what he's talking about?
Marie von Franz, who argued about the problems associated with the identity principle. You got Kurt Gödel, who talked about it. You got Wells. All of them said it made everything incommensurable just because they gave that identity principle to the number 1. And that has been the stumbling block for mathematicians because it's what's held everybody behind because they keep trying to make that work. Am I wrong?
Yeah, you're wrong if we do it that way. In other words, I can take...
Is anything that he's saying correct?
Terrence has several influences, which, again, I don't think it's clear to me.
This is why Eric does not belong here. I will give Joe credit for asking point blank whether anything Terry says is correct. He genuinely wants to know. The answer is no. He has no clue what he's talking about and just spews word salad that doesn't mean anything. Terry has no clue what Gödel did or any other mathematician or what any principle means. The person in Eric's position is supposed to say no. Nothing he says is correct. End of story. But he doesn't do that. He feigns charitability to gain fans.
I don't have an issue with multiplication either.
Well, then 1 times 1 is what?
1 times 1 should equal 2. And action times an action. If you can show me one place in the universe.
But you just shifted
No. Show me one place in the universe. One natural observable phenomenon where 1 times 1 equals 1, where an action times an action doesn't have a reaction.
So then you just went into there's a concept called logomachy, which is arguing over words.
This is about as good as it gets here. Eric is pushing back on 1 times 1 equals 2, and he is accurately asserting that Terry is playing word games. But Terry needs to be aggressively shown how he is wrong, and it needs to happen in a way that everyone listening can easily follow. 1 times 1 means 1 group of 1. 3 bowls times 2 coins per bowl equals 6 coins. 2 bowls times 2 coins per bowl equals 4 coins. 2 bowls times 1 coin per bowl equals 2 coins. 1 bowl times 1 coin per bowl equals 1 coin. That's what 1 times 1 means. 1 group of 1, therefore 1. Terry already pretended he had been speaking metaphorically, but now he's going back to defending his inability to do basic arithmetic. It's beyond pathetic, and he should be publicly humiliated for insisting on this idiocy over and over again. Eric gives a lengthy monologue about how one such arithmetic contradiction would ruin all of math, but he doesn't assert that this is how we know Terry is wrong. Terry has no ability to even make a coherent comment.
Some forklift guy hits some strut, and the entire warehouse goes... That's what you're dealing with the principle of explosion.
And that's the problems with the identity principle that they've been trying to work on for years. For years, Norman J. Wildberger talks about it. It is because you have to cancel conservation of energy, and you have to cancel the action and reactionary laws.
This is a pattern. Terry knows he has no clue what he's talking about. So what does he do? He drops a name. Norman J. Wildberger. Who is that? What does he say? What did he do? No attempt to elaborate. It's just a name drop to pretend he's part of a grander discourse. He isn't. Then, of course, he deflects to concepts in physics like conservation of energy, which are not relevant whatsoever to the pure math he's trying to discuss. This is all he can do to deflect from his terrible math.
Dollar times a dollar. That was a problem.
That's the Dewey Decimal System.
That's
the problem
Dewey
with
Decimal.
No, the problem comes up with the Dewey Decimal System. Why a dollar times a dollar can be different values based on different currencies. That was the point of that. I was pointing out, hey, the Dewey Decimal System is
Terrence
whack.
Terrence makes a correct point that we say 1 times 1 equals 1, but if you say a dollar times a dollar is not a sensible thing unless a dollar squared is a unit that you can interpret.
The Dewey Decimal System, everybody. The method of classification used at the library. Terry is trying to discuss decimal points in arithmetic, and he calls it the Dewey Decimal System. What more evidence do you need that Terry just repeats random terminology he's heard with no clue what it means? Why is nobody mocking him for saying Dewey Decimal System? Eric skips right over that and correctly explains that a dollar times a dollar would be a dollar squared, which is meaningless, so when Terry tries to use that as an example, he sounds like an idiot. But we never get the payoff, which should be Terry admitting that he doesn't understand basic math. Now on to the flower of life.
You know, people always say as above, so below, but what if you said as below, so above, and you imagine that there was a three-dimensional structure floating above this that actually projects down to this and distorts down to this. So that's the first idea. The first idea is it's not this, it's the thing that projected to this. And that's what you mean when you say opening the flower.
This is one reasonable steel man that Eric provides, since opening up the flower of life doesn't mean anything. But what Eric said does mean something. The idea that this shape could be something sort of like a two-dimensional shadow of a three-dimensional object or set of objects. Let's see if Terry is smart enough to accept this much better articulation of his insanity.
Because the flower of, when I was researching where the Platonic solids came from, this is the oldest version that I got from all of antiquity. It came back to them.
Well, there are no Platonic solids because you're in dimension 2, except for what you built, which is the thing above in black.
And, of course, he fumbles it immediately, dragging us all back to his Platonic solids, which Eric points out are certainly not present in this image, since those are three-dimensional objects.
But what they did years ago, 6,000 years ago, was draw straight lines where the circles overlapped. And I thought in what I was reasoning with regard to all energy being expressed in motion, all motion being expressed in waves, all waves being curved, and that there were no straight lines in the universe. So I was like...
There's several errors in what you just said.
Terry begins to malfunction when he isn't allowed to spew his well-rehearsed script. It's right back to his word salad about energy and motion and waves. Eric doesn't like it, though.
If I stop there, we'll get off track again.
Yeah, but you should correct those errors while we're there.
Okay. It is not true that all energy is expressed in motion.
What energy is not expressed in motion?
Potential energy is not expressed in motion. If I have a weight on a spring, which is sort of the quintessential, people don't know this, but most of physics comes out of the system represented by a weight on a spring.
Mm-hmm.
Potential energy, the energy of position, not motion. I wonder, has anyone else brought that up? Whatever he could mean by that, he's wrong. For example, potential energy is the energy held by an object by virtue of its position in a field, like a gravitational or electromagnetic field. No motion, yet energy. Eric elaborates somewhat excessively, and then Terry desperately tries to come off like he has any ability to discuss basic physics.
Because all of the energy is in the potential of the spring.
It's in the stress of the crystallization that has occurred within that system.
And then you will say something like...
But that energy is still being held together. There is still energy there, and it's still moving at a microscopic level. It's still spinning centrifugal.
He just says the word crystallization for no reason, and then tries to bring up other forms of kinetic energy that don't have anything to do with what Eric is talking about. If you compress a spring, it has potential energy, and it is not moving. That's the point. Eric should have just said that repeatedly if necessary. By talking at great length about esoteric concepts and terminology, it's too easy for the viewer to get lost and for Terry to then find places to hide within the jargon to pretend he knows what he's talking about. Compressed spring, no motion, potential energy, the end. Terry is wrong, and as happens repeatedly in this conversation, there is no resolution. Someone changes the subject 3 times in 10 seconds, and we are off to something else.
These 2 photons that were entangled, and it looks like a yin and a yang. Have you seen this?
People always want to talk about faster-than-light communications by taking an entangled pair and saying that if I do something in one place, I know what happens outside of my light cone. So we can give meaning to these things, and then you have to say, well, it doesn't allow you to create information transfer faster than the speed of light. You have to be very careful and precise about it. But if you just start getting jiggy, then you start thinking...
you introduce the ether.
Thanks, sir.
So the ether...
Yeah.
This is most of the episode. Joe brings up something totally random. Eric kind of explains some aspect of it in a way that absolutely nobody listening will understand. Terry just says ether for absolutely no reason, and then Eric doesn't make fun of Terry for pretending he's not completely clueless. It's a circus sideshow.
And if you call that the ether, that's more or less what we work with. And then we do this weird thing where we say, well, they used to think the ether existed and it didn't. Ha, ha, ha. And that's not really...
No. Because that's when they said that space was a vacuum, and they realized that space is not
a vacuum.
It's not a vacuum. Yeah. It's not a vacuum.
Do you know how much is going on in that vacuum? It's all going on.
Yes, all of this stuff.
I understand. So this is the thing, which is if you step on this thing the wrong way, everybody laughs and says, ha, 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 he doesn't understand the Michelson-Morley experiment. He doesn't understand why there's no ether. And then we secretly sneak it back in.
Yes, we should say, ha ha ha, Terry doesn't understand the Michelson-Morley experiment. He doesn't understand that the ether has been disproven. Eric talks about what's going on in the vacuum of space, presumably referencing the zero-point energy and quantum fluctuation, which has nothing to do with the obsolete concept of the luminiferous ether, and again pretends that it somehow pertains to Terry's inability to discuss science from 150 years ago. It's an immense disservice.
In analogy to off-access digital holography, where we coincidence imaging of the superposition of an unknown state with a reference state is used to perform quantum state tomography. What the fuck?
See, but that's because of the uncertainty and Schrodinger,
right.
All of that. But if you were able, because they started off trying to predict an electron cloud, and find a little particle inside of it and couldn't predict it, so all these uncertainties and probabilities came out, but they were doing things on a 2-dimensional basis. That's what I believe that I've figured out with the wave conjugations, because they talk about they show the pieces of hyperbolic space to where you don't have to go through all these unnecessary steps to reach it.
I am just so happy that someone's doing something like this. I'm so happy that we can talk about it. I don't think most people have any understanding of what's going on at the highest levels of this kind of science.
There is only one way to contextualize all of this. People like to understand things. People also hate learning things. What you get is a bunch of people who want to understand the frontier of theoretical physics without ever having learned any physics whatsoever. So they listen to Joe Rogan read a section of an abstract, then they listen to Terry pretend to not only understand it, but to have actually innovated new physics that supersedes it, and then everybody pats themselves on the back for pretending to be interested in science. Joe is a shaman who conjures up an undeserved sense of intellectuality for the lazy common man, and frauds like Terry take advantage of it to gain a cult following. All you have to do is memorize a bunch of words and use them randomly. From his first sentence, he says uncertainty and then Schrodinger, when he's clearly pretending to know what the Heisenberg uncertainty principle states and who formulated it. He has no idea what any physicist has ever done. He has no clue what any of these principles say. He's just in love with reciting words that sound complicated to him. And someone like Eric has no business acting like a scholar when he doesn't shine a light on exactly what's going on here. If he can't get Terry to admit that 1 times 1 equals 1, what is the point of going through all of this esoterica?
It's weird to think that this little studio, in a weird way, is one of the rivals of universities when we don't know what's going on at Harvard as you have recently seen. We don't kick out plagiarists. We don't check what's going on at the National Institute of Health. And so it's very strange that this table is one of the last things that is trusted by many people. And that's one of the reasons I'm here, which is people have a chance to see people in conversation about things. And, you screw up, but the conversation's recorded and we all go on and people have a chance to see what's coming out.
Yes, it is absolutely insane that people put more stock in what one delusional actor says than all of the mathematicians and scientists all over the world. That's where we are at as a society. It is complete epistemological breakdown. People would rather pretend that basic arithmetic is wrong than admit that they blindly follow charlatans. And shame on Eric for feeding into this cycle to amass his own following.
All of these things I went up to Oxford 8 years ago and tried to present them there to be examined. They didn't want to take me seriously.
Because you keep coming at it
because the one times one, when I said the one times one, but like I said, that was a metaphor to say
Terrence,
something's wrong, something's wrong, but they know something's wrong with the math. It's not adding up.
So you bring up renormalization theory a lot.
Right.
Renormalization theory is a way of saying we know that we're working with math that's wrong, and on the other hand, we have a way of working with math that's wrong, even though we know it's wrong.
Again, Terry uses this ridiculous metaphor excuse to pretend he isn't stupid. But there's nothing wrong with the math. He just doesn't want to learn math. But people are so obsessed with the idea that math could be wrong that they just believe him when he says math is wrong. Instead of showing Terry how wrong he is, Eric rhetorically corroborates this dumb lie, and Joe buys into it hook, line, and sinker.
So is there a potential future where human beings, through whatever means, develop a superior method of mathematics that doesn't have a problem with the number 2, that doesn't have all these issues that we're talking about?
Well, that's what I think I've done with my wave conjugations. It solves all of those problems. That's what I can't wait to talk about it.
I can barely summon the words to express how maddening this is. Joe just reasserts this idiotic script that there's something wrong with the number 2 just because Terry needs this problem to exist to pretend that 1 times 1 equals 2, which he continues to double down on even after pretending he was speaking metaphorically. There are so many millions of people all over the world who could crap all over this idiotic fantasy, but the only guy there is Eric, who needs to placate this delusion. So let's hear Terry pretend that wave conjugations mean something.
What Terrence is going to start talking about as wave conjugations. And he has different ways that spheres run into each other. Then he says something very cryptic where he says, if you drop a
pebble
in the center of a spherical lake, circularly symmetric lake, the wave will radiate out until it hits the wall, the shore, and then it will radiate back. And so he's talking about this, and he says wave conjugations, and wave conjugation didn't call up anything directly when I heard him say it.
They would call it a phase conjugation.
Well, or they would talk about, the conjugate wave coming back. If you do something
yes,
like a garden hose that's affixed to the wall, it'll hit the wall and come back or something. So what Terrence is talking about is the idea, and you could do this where we could drop, like, let's say 6 stones in precise places in water, and then, using super slow-mo, watch what happens as these waves in precisely placed places run into each other. Because really what physics is waves in collision.
And they're going to create a particular cymatics, which is going to show the harmonic points where...
The important part is where Eric basically says that wave conjugations doesn't mean anything. Terry says phase conjugation because he recently had a Google party and found a tangentially related term that he wants to pretend is what he means. Then Eric describes something that has nothing to do with Terry's pretty shapes, so Terry acts like he knows what's happening and piles some more crazy on top.
And that cube will have an octahedral cavity that looks like this. That's how I think you generated this sucker.
I actually generated this by putting 8 of the pieces together. I took 8 of those triangular pieces together, and I put them together. They basically became the basis of 2 tetraons.
Yeah.
You know, which this would be seen as a neutron. And the interesting thing about this piece right here is nature always makes things in pairs, and they're always balanced. This doesn't exist. This exists only as a result of a pressure condition, a higher pressure condition.
Just more Terry Brand word salad. This is a neutron? How is that a neutron? Does he even know what a neutron is? Why doesn't Eric ask him what the hell he means when he says that's a neutron? Higher pressure condition? Pressure of what? He has no idea what pressure means. He's saying absolutely nothing, and nobody is doing anything about it.
The problem, Terrence, is that you have a desire to go immediately towards what this means, right? And before you get to what it means, people don't even know what it is.
True.
Right?
Eric knows that retaining a shred of credibility requires some modicum of pushback, and that's what this is, but it's just not enough. He has no interest in teaching Terry anything. He just wants to piggyback on his crazy to leech off of his cult-generating momentum.
Neil can't figure out, well, where did this come from? So what it is spheres of radius √2 at the 8 vertices of a cube, passing through each other, but closing off an octahedral cavity with positively curved triangles inside.
That's what I needed you for.
Well,
That's just when I needed you most.
This moment encapsulates what these 3 men are here for. Terry is here to appear validated by someone who knows what they're talking about. Eric is here to capitalize on a meme to bolster his profile. And Joe is here for the clicks. That's all.
I think it's a foolish thing almost always to pretend there's nothing new under the sun. You should always consider it.
Well,
you might not be correct, but there's only one way to find out.
Well, there's a difference between, you see, Terrence has much greater odds of contributing to the world of engineering than he does to the world of mathematics. I mean, the odds that he's doing something new in mathematics, I'll be blunt, are very, very small.
Even though I have patents on it that shows that all of this is
I
novel?
don't want to go there. The patents do not speak to what you think that they speak to.
That's okay.
Joe says it's foolish to think there's nothing new to be discovered, which of course nobody says. That's just a line people use when their objectively wrong bullshit is shown to be objectively wrong. People will continue to discover new things, and they will do so by first learning what we already know, something which takes many years and lots of hard work, and which people like Terry and Joe will never ever do. Eric says Terry will never contribute to math, and Terry brings up his patents. Surprisingly, Eric burns Terry by taking a dump on his patents. For the thousands of people on my first Terry video complaining about his patents, let's make it clear that he's totally full of crap. He doesn't have 97 patents. He has 11 design patents for children's toys and 3 patent applications, 2 of which are for jewelry. The third is the AR/VR patent he was bragging about in the other episode, and that is a rejected patent application. The official reason is abandoned, failure to respond to an office action given in 2013, and the year prior he received a non-final rejection citing errors in diagrams and imprecise language, and too much similarity to an existing patent. The citations he referred to are just IP that are related by concept and keyword. VR was invented before Terry was born, and he's never invented or innovated anything. He's just a lying fraud who is now pretending that he has patents on math, a thing you can't do.
The reason that science works as well as it does is that up until very recently, there were clear rules, cultures. We agreed to leave certain things that are at the door, like our religious beliefs. We agreed to submit to certain sorts of things. We were decent to each other. And that system is in a process of collapse at the moment, all right?
Yes, it's collapsing because the general public thinks that anyone who actually studies and knows things is a corrupt government shill, while confidently clueless asshats like Terry are geniuses. It will be what destroys the human race.
Terrence is coming from a polymathic perspective. He's all over the map in terms of the quality of his thinking. As far as I understand, some of his stuff is really, really good. Some of his stuff is offensive. And it's everything in between. Now, I'm not gunning for you.
No. I don't take that offensively.
Okay.
I take it in the fact that you're here. But let's get back to what I was saying about having, if my pieces.
Of course, Eric was instead saying that Terry should be taken seriously, while in the same breath stating that some of what he says is so idiotic that it's offensive. Terry keeps the compliment and blows right past the insult by nervously steering the conversation the way he wants it to go.
But what it's showing you is where electricity is being pushed into the center, and you'll see these magnetic waves coming out. It's showing you the magnetic field. So these predict and create a natural dodecahedron, whereas these come together and create a natural icosahedron. That's not something that just happens by accident.
No, this isn't an accident.
I'll put it over.
What's going on, Terrence, for me?
Can you connect all these together in one big ball of fury?
Yes, they just keep getting, because it's supersymmetry.
Yeah.
They all fit together.
I want to see
That's
these
what
and
I'm
these
saying.
together.
It ain't supersymmetry, but it's freaking cool.
Right. I know what you're saying.
When Terry pretends that his shape has anything to do with a magnetic field, that's where a physicist is supposed to say, "What the hell are you talking about? Stop rambling, Terry. Magnetic field. How is this a magnetic field? Where is it? From what? How? What is a magnetic field? What causes them to exist? Do you know?" But Eric doesn't do that. He giggles to himself, knowing that Terry uses the word supersymmetric incorrectly, but that's not enough.
So he then starts to make noises about it. And he says things that I don't love, which are that those faces he associates with the electric field, and the vertices, which sometimes he calls vortices and sometimes, I'm not quite sure, he associates with the magnetic field.
Yes.
Now, I don't have a clue
Why
he says the next thing, which is, and because the number of magnetic and the number of electric things are balanced, they cancel out, and therefore it's the weak force. And to me, it's just like super cool stuff, and then suddenly turns into horseshit.
Well, look at that. Maybe Eric has it in him after all. Electric field, magnetic field, vertices, vortices. It's all horseshit. Any thoughts, Terry?
But listen why. Here we have those two tetraons on the end. They both have equal poles, 4 electric poles and 4 magnetic poles, according to how I see it. Where magnetism is spinning off of the tips, the vortices, because it's no longer able to maintain that center space of spinning centripetally.
I don't know what the hell you're talking about.
Yeah, what brought you to that conclusion?
A normal person in Terry's shoes would admit that they aren't saying anything, but Terry is not a normal person. This time, Joe doesn't want to let him off the hook as easily as he normally does, but it doesn't go anywhere. Terry just spews sentence after sentence of completely meaningless tripe that isn't even worth listening to, and he isn't held sufficiently accountable for it. Eric sometimes point-blank tells Terry he's wrong, but then he just talks about something esoteric instead of helping the viewer see how wrong he is. Here's an example.
It's actually the case that electromagnetism, the weak force and the strong force, are a different form of curvature, which might be called Erasmanian curvature or fiber bundle curvature, which is not necessarily Riemannian intrinsic curvature. This object encodes the curvature, it encodes electromagnetism as the components of curvature. To your point about nothing is a straight line.
But this is where I have issues. You're talking about this is in Cartesian space. And in Cartesian space, curvature is not allowed.
Mm-mm.
There's no curvature that's allowed in Cartesian space.
That's wrong.
Really?
Yeah. Because what you have, and by the way, this is a super subtle thing. We've only really known this for 50 years.
No, it's not a super subtle thing that we've only known for 50 years. No curvature allowed in Cartesian space? What about all the curves we learned about in middle school? The conic sections, parabolas, hyperbolas, circles, ellipses, spheres, all kinds of other three-dimensional shapes. I didn't play the whole clip of what Eric was explaining because it's long and irrelevant, but Terry had no idea what Eric was talking about, jumped in and said the word Cartesian to sound intelligent, and and then said something insanely stupid. The correct response is, why the hell are you saying there is no curvature in Cartesian space, and why would you say something so insanely stupid? Eric says he's wrong, but he calls the distinction subtle because he's leaving room for Terry to wiggle away unscathed. He wants to ramble about something esoteric to sound intelligent when he should be explaining middle school level math for Terry, for Joe, for the listeners, because that's what they need to learn. They have no ability to understand the complicated things he's talking about. They need to learn the basics.
On a simple level, how would you describe electricity?
Well, I wouldn't know how to do it simply. Electricity is really, electromagnetism is really about rock, paper, scissors.
No, Eric, you had Terry on his back knowing that he can't comment on anything you're saying, and he managed to ask a simple question requesting a simple answer. Instead of using some abstract analogy to seem thoughtful and accessible, just answer the question. Electricity is a flow of particles possessing electric charge. That's it. Electrons are negatively charged particles, and they flow along a metal wire to your outlets to provide electrical energy. Just teach basic physics. Don't ramble for several minutes about optical illusions. When you keep things unintelligible and abstract, Terry feels emboldened to do this too, and that's where he likes to hide so that people can't see how dumb he is.
Predict every harmonic node, every wave function. It will continue on. They overlap on each other to where any size, any crystalline configuration that somebody could hope for occurs. This is the supersymmetry that I'm talking about that defines the entire wave field. This is one part of, this is the crystalline electric wave field. That's not even, that's just one of the crystallines.
How cool is this?
Pretty cool.
The problem that you're in right now.
He doesn't know what a wave function is. He doesn't know what supersymmetry means. These shapes don't predict anything. He's not doing anything. He's not demonstrating anything. Is anyone going to demand that Terry actually demonstrate literally anything?
Is everything that you touch in this space made of spheres and platonic solids and whatever. You could spend your entire life, and I've seen people do it, staring into this and just finding cool thing after cool thing, thinking that you're seeing Jesus. I promise you.
He's being rightfully dismissive, but he's not actually holding Terry accountable for anything he's saying. There are moments where he talks down to him, but they're too few and far between, and they don't stick for the viewer.
But if light passing through these show the same cymatics that we look at when we're looking at natural occurrences of individual frequencies, doesn't that become its own secondary proof beyond the symmetry of what it does?
Okay. You say geometry is a proof, and one of the things is you are at your weakest when you have you have an equal sign. No. You're strongest geometrically. You're at your weakest when you have an equal sign. You say the dumbest stuff about equalities, and you say the coolest stuff about geometries. And I wonder whether you mean something.
It's funny that they both criticized Neil's response to Terry when Eric is kind of doing the same thing as Neil. Telling Terry he's at his strongest with geometry is basically just saying that he made up some pretty shapes. That's what Neil said. Everything else is garbage, which is what Eric is more or less saying here too. But then we get back to the bad math.
Yep, hit 2, square root. It'll be over one more. I think that may be it. Yeah. Yep. Cube it. Hit x to the third. No. Go back. Go back. Yep. Hit 2. Square root. Cube it. Up. Right up there. Yep. Now divide by 2. Hit equal. Cube it again. X to the third. Divide by 2. That is a loop. Cube it again, hit x to the third. That's an unnatural
Talk to me about unnatural.
It's a loop. It's a tuck inside of the matrix. It does not allow for math to make sense because of the identity principle.
There is no loop. There is no tuck in the matrix. Terry is just a moron who doesn't understand basic math. Why is it so hard to accept that there could be a number for which cubing it and doubling it yields the same result? What would someone do if they wanted to figure out whether such a number exists? Well, we could do some basic algebra. Let's find the value x for which cubing it, x cubed, gives you the same result as doubling it, 2x. Well, let's set these expressions equal to each other and solve for x. X cubed is x times x times x. Now what do? Let's cancel an x from both sides. That leaves us with x times x, or x squared, equals 2. Take the square root of both sides, and we get root 2. X equals root 2. Root 2 is a number for which cubing and doubling gives the same result, 2 root 2. You can even prove this by looking at the graphs of these functions. Y equals x cubed gives this curve here, and y equals 2x is this line here. Where do these functions intersect? Root 2, negative root 2, and 0, since they both pass through the origin. There are 3 values for which cubing and doubling gives the same result. There is no loop. He's just performing basic arithmetic operations over and over again for absolutely no reason. You can double 2 to get 4 and then subtract 2 to get 2 and do that over and over again until the end of the universe. That's just you wasting your time. Now, I'm quite confident that every single person watching this video understood what I just explained and also learned this in middle school or by about 10th grade at the latest. This is what somebody should be showing Terry. How does Eric choose to address this baloney?
You're trying to say something. What you're saying is wrong.
What I'm seeing, no.
No. What you're saying is fine. I agree that you have a transformation that I called T. You can put those 2 steps together, which is cube and divide by 2. That thing is going to be dead still till the end of time. That's your point. And then you pass judgment on it. And you say that is not logical and it's irrational. And I don't know what you mean.
He doesn't mean anything. He just can't do basic math. So please teach him the basic math. That's the reason you're there, isn't it?
That loop right there.
Is your point that there's something special about the square root of 2?
I'm saying that the square root of 2 is a manufactured number because of the identity principle. If the identity principle was not involved, then they wouldn't have a problem with 1 times 1 equaling 2.
Why are you offended by 1 times 1 equaling 1?
Just because action and reaction, the universe, it's the separation of math from science when math was supposed to define physical things. So when they have things that doesn't align, we can't make sense. The rest of the audience don't understand. They're like,
Terry is so transparently grasping at straws here, it's pathetic. He's a malfunctioning robot trying to stay on script. Action and reaction, all his usual nonsense, just because he can't accept that he doesn't understand basic math. It's tragic. And you can see how exasperated he gets when his script, that has been impressing coked-up losers at Hollywood parties, falls flat in front of educated people.
Fear, what the hell?
No, I'm literally saying there is nothing in the universe that is at rest because everything is moving and communicating through vibration, and vibration requires oscillation, and oscillation requires motion.
This is his magnificent proof that 1 times 1 equals 2. Things vibrate. He's a deer in headlights at this point, but he just cannot accept a reality where he isn't a genius.
Science took a wrong turn when it walked down the road of relativity.
Okay.
In abandoning the ether. And now they've walked down this road and now they realize that it's a potential dead end, but instead of turning around and saying, okay, well, let's use the luminiferous ether that all of these equations were built off of. And here a young man that's outside of the world has come in and said, okay, I have the wave conjugations that make up and prove the etheric nature, the etheric substance.
He's completely manic. Einstein was a moron and I'm so much smarter. That's what he's saying. He can't do second-grade math, but he's smarter than Einstein. The hubris is unimaginable. Imagine what it's like in Terry's head. He has no idea what relativity is. Truly none. You could show him any page from a relativity textbook and he would just crap his pants. And yet, he is better than it. He simply has to be. Or what is reality? What is reality for Terry if he isn't the supreme chosen one? How can he be the Kwisatz Haderach? How can he be Neo? How can he be Jesus the Christ if he isn't smarter than Einstein? I'll give Eric some credit for using a harsher tone in this section, but it's just not enough to break through this egomaniacal defense system.
Is this something, so this is my community and how it thinks of everything in the world, all right?
Right.
Do you have a way of relating what you think about in terms of what my community has wrong? Does this mean anything to you?
If you remove gravity outside of the equation, you take gravity out because gravity is affected. Gravity is actually covered by that strong electrical force.
Terrence, 1 second. Without, this is not a gotcha, and it's
not
me.
I know. I'm just saying.
Do you know how to read this?
As best as we're talking about, I as imaginary.
Yeah.
You know, D to the 4. I don't know what the D represents.
So that's the volume element saying that you're in 4-dimensional space and you're going to take an integral.
And y to a negative G, y to a negative gravity.
Yeah, that's the determinant of the space-time metric with which you might have an issue. Okay? So in other words, you're normalizing, you're saying that if the rulers look one way or the rulers look another way, according to Einstein, you have to put more weight or less weight on a region of space. Do you know what that R is? That's the foreplay, and then in the parentheses is where the stuff gets crazy.
Explain it.
That's enough of that. Terry has no idea what any of this means. He can't do middle school level physics, and he looks like a little kid for several minutes while Eric takes a pointless flex, complete with little interjections to pretend like he's following along.
Dirac, in that term psi bar d psi, is telling us the kinetics and the interaction through minimal coupling of the matter with the force that's in the line above.
Right.
And then the last 3 terms are the fudge factor due to Peter Higgs, because when he found out in the late 50s...
It's the most pathetic thing I've ever seen, but does the audience get what they need out of this? Is it registering for them what a toddler Terry really is? I don't think so, because they're all zoning out right now, just like Joe, and it goes on for a very long time. But once Eric wraps it up, Terry desperately tries to steer it back his way.
Now, this is the difference between having, they've been working on this for damn near 60, 70 years. But they don't have any physical models that represent any of these things. And if my physical models describe the electric force and the magnetic force and is able to account for all of the actions that takes place or the effects that we see, then it should be a better replacement instead of having to
Terrence,
go through...
you didn't do that.
I did do that. Let me show you.
All right.
Let me show you.
Okay, show.
Now it's time to show.
Okay, here we go.
He says they don't have any physical models because he's never looked inside a physics textbook, and then he goes back to pretending his dumb shapes do anything whatsoever, which they don't. Let's make sure everyone can see how pointless these shapes are.
Tetryon, as I say, begins the entire dance. I would call that would be Planck to me. That would be the proton. That would be the beginning of everything.
You map 4 different things to this. You say, 1, it's dark matter.
I said
because it's interstitial. Wait 1 second.
Okay.
You say 1, it's dark matter because it's interstitial. 2, you say it's hydrogen.
It becomes it takes
3, you say, well, look, it's got 4 electric and 4 magnetic.
We don't even have to go beyond this. Terry just a moment ago said this was a proton. Now he's saying it's hydrogen. Eric says he has previously correlated this with dark matter. how to any of this. He is combining random shapes with random words, nothing more.
If we start with this as electricity, then we want to go to the very first phase from it. The first thing that happens to it is it decays. The first line of decay, and that first line of decay is literally just putting on two magnetic fields.
So the shape is electricity now? I thought it was hydrogen. It decays? How? And into what? What is a line of decay? And because of two magnetic fields, none of this means anything. Eric should be telling him that none of that means anything and refusing to move forward until Terry admits that none of it means anything.
Anytime you're urinating, a man is urinating, he sees this pattern where it's expanding and contracting. Expanding, contracting,
Right.
that braiding behind the boat. This describes that motion from that. But then let's go to the next stage of decay. The next stage of decay would be four sides. Now what these are responsible for, boom, boom.
How you doing, Eric?
All right, Joe.
Yeah, here we go.
It's like a pee stream from a wiener, so it's revolutionary physics. This is right on par with the sun goes poo-poo. It makes me wonder about the kinds of fetishes he's hiding. And Terry is just playing the part of the disheveled scientist while Joe and Eric wonder what will happen next. It takes a while, but Eric finally steers it in a better direction.
If you want to say, I don't understand this, you get a positive reaction from us. If you say, I have something and I'm not quite sure what it is, can I get an evaluation because I think I might have something? You should be able to get something from a guy like me.
And that's what I did. I went to Oxford.
I know.
Didn't get that.
But I'm trying to say
went
something.
these cats. Okay.
Then you do this other thing, which is you teach. And your teaching is not good. You tell us stuff that's not true, that we can tell is not true. And then we say, okay, I can throw out the entirety of what he's saying.
What did I say that wasn't true, though? That's what I'm, that's, I
Well,
mean,
one
my
times
whole-
one is not equal to two. Let's start there. In fact, I'm angry at Joe because Joe should have pushed back on that. Joe is in awe
The
of the way
calculator says 1 times 1 doesn't equal 1.
Finally, a little criticism thrown Joe's way for platforming somebody who pretends 1 times 1 equals 2 and not pushing back on it whatsoever. Yes, Terry says things that are objectively wrong all the time. Let's see if we can keep up this momentum.
I didn't mean to. That's not what I meant to do. But in me saying 1 times 1 equals 2, like I said, that's a metaphor that there's something very wrong with the math because math should not be done.
There's nothing wrong with the math.
I'm saying the math that we are doing is still based on linear projections, even though we are in a multi-dimensional space.
Terry, make up your goddamn mind. Is it a metaphor or not? If it's a metaphor, then stop pretending that 1 times 1 should actually literally equal 2. Or just admit that you don't know what a metaphor is. Sadly, from here, it's just back to a bunch of esoteric concepts. Eric brings it back 20 minutes later to dunk on Terry a little bit.
And that process is the radiative process. That's the process I call magnetism that that tears apart, that rarefies that which was concentrically drawn together through electricity. That weak force is an equal force to electricity.
Terrence, let me ask you a question.
That's what I feel.
I'm taller than Joe.
Right.
Imagine I challenge Joe to a fight. What do you think happens next? I get my ass kicked.
Well, Joe knows some shit that you
Joe
don't know.
knows some serious shit. I have an advantage on him in terms of weight. I have an advantage on him in terms of height. He's in great condition. The guy knows how to fight, and he's got a spinning back kick to die for, okay? What happens is I get my ass kicked. You do not know when you're going to get your ass kicked. And it's a big problem that you're going to keep courting because I watch you. You keep finding the space where we could come together, and you insist on teaching into it. And it's like I'm trying to be nice as pie because I'm inspired by what you're trying to do. But you have no idea, like, when you're fucking with a guy with an Italian last name and a shiny suit with a funny collar that you don't recognize. You got to stop.
Yeah, and I see the metaphor in it.
That got a little dark, but even Eric, who came here to scoop up some Terry fans, is starting to get a little tired of listening to Terry pretend he has any clue what he's talking about. But remember, while some of his ramblings are signature Terry bullshit, a lot of it is lifted from elsewhere.
Can I ask you, before we go on further, you feel that the theory of gravity is incorrect, and there's something else that accounts for all of the effects that we call gravity?
Yes. I feel.
And what do you think that is?
I feel that's electricity. I feel that gravity is the draft left behind.
Yes, again, Terry watched some Thunderbolts videos and got high on the electric universe pseudoscience, so he tries to present those lies as his own.
The opposite of those thermals, I believe that gravity is the opposite of those thermals in the electric force. It's the pulling down the same way the thermals push up.
What do you think about that?
I don't even want to touch it. Well, because I'm going to get into the same thing. I'm trying to say to you.
I know, and I'm just saying, and I could be wrong.
You could be wrong? You are wrong, Terry. You're so wrong that the word wrong does not sufficiently describe your wrongness. You are, as they say, fractally wrong. You are wrong at every conceivable level of resolution. You use words incorrectly. You combine those words with other concepts incorrectly, and the combinations themselves result in incorrect statements. Everything you say is immaculately wrong, and yet you confidently present your gibberish as though it is the solution to every problem in physics because you're a narcissist.
Deep inside the orange or any other piece of matter is nothing but a dancing, vibrating cosmic symphony of strings.
Okay, now, if you take what he just said, this is entirely respectable. This is a Columbia professor lecturing me for 40 fucking years about what they're going to do one day when they grow up. That everything is just a string, and just the way a violin can vibrate in different modes. All of the particles come from this excitation of the string. That's exactly how you sound with the linchpin. Now, string theory is not a terrible idea initially. It becomes a terrible idea when the string theorists suggest that nothing else has happened for 40 years, and they've sought to kill off every single person who has pointed out that there are other ideas and that they don't listen to their colleagues. And so, in part, you're going to incur an emotional penalty from me with the linchpin, which is a terrible thing because the linchpin is actually incredibly cool. So the same basic pattern, which is one thing explains it all, has a terrible kind of cadence.
Because I'm about to get you. I'm about to get you.
But my point is,
no, Terry, you're not about to get anyone. You're being shown that you're stupid right to your face. Eric is correct to point out that he's totally ridiculous for pretending to have solved anything with his dumb shape. He's also correct to point out that string theory hasn't really turned out to be the big solution to anything. But again, he is way too charitable in pretending that anything Terry says is anywhere near the level of string theory, a real theory which is totally coherent, based on valid mathematical structures, and is in general real science that just turned out to be somewhat of a dead end. Terry just vomits hot garbage, but Eric has his anti-academia agenda to attend to, so he tries to make Terry and theoretical physicists look stupid at the same time.
Another thing that I see you taking a lot of guff for is the periodic table. Now, I don't like your periodic table, but you are also the only person I know who's pushing into the public consciousness the understanding.
Everything Terry says about chemistry is totally insane, so this doesn't sound like it's going to go well.
The ionization energies of the elements as represented here in a periodic table, and we are going to produce tones representing those energies. The way that this app works is each one of these elements in the table is actually a push button, and I can play tones with these push buttons. The settings in this control panel here will determine how those energies will be converted into tones that we can hear. First of all, we're just going to look at a few of the controls for now. See, we have transpose frequency. The frequencies corresponding to these ionization energies are extremely high, so we have to transpose them down to a range that
As you said.
So here we're going to transpose it down, in this case, 42 octaves, negative 42. So let's start with hydrogen. If I transpose it 43 octaves down, I get that tone. Or I can go 44 octaves down.
This is meaningless. Ionization energies are not sounds, just like light is not sound. You can take any set of numbers and magically transform them into frequencies of sound, and it is absolutely meaningless. You could do it for the annual GDP of every country, for the distance of every star in the galaxy from galactic center, for the number of banana cream pies sold at a particular bakery each month. It does not mean anything. Elements are not sounds.
See, I tried to do the same thing, and I called...
People treat you like you're nuts.
I called UCLA asking for the prime resonant frequency of the elements, and they wouldn't give them to me.
Terry is nuts, and nobody at UCLA would tell him the prime resonant frequency of the elements because that's not a thing. Do you notice how Eric is not explaining anything whatsoever about how these tones are being produced? What set of data is being interpreted? The ionization energy of hydrogen is 1,312 kilojoules per mole. How does that become the little ding you hear? And what could this value possibly have to do with any kind of frequency of anything? Ionization is not a cyclical process. You ionize hydrogen and then it's an ion. The end. Frequencies describe cyclical processes, quantifying a number of cycles per unit time. This is one instance where Terry and Eric are both saying different versions of absolutely nothing.
You say this thing about hydrogen 40.5.
Well, no,
hertz.
I wasn't saying...
Wait a second.
But I wasn't saying that hydrogen is 40.5. I was saying that the key of E is 40.5 hertz and doubles to 162. Those things...
Yeah, but you said it in a very authoritative way. And the 40.5 is not 40.5 hertz. It's 40.5 megahertz associated not with hydrogen, but with mercury.
But you have to keep... Once you keep doubling that...
But wait a second,
get
Terrence.
to the...
This is just ridiculous. Not only do these frequencies not correlate with anything whatsoever about any chemical elements, he doesn't even understand the difference between a note and a key in music. A single frequency defines a single note, and a single note does not define a key. This is the key of E major. This is the key of E minor. One note is not a key. Terry does not understand basic music theory, but again, the most important thing is that these numbers have nothing to do with any elements. Eric is failing miserably here.
Like hydrogen. And then you imagine carbon is an octave above, I think is what you said. Mm-hmm. Doubling the frequency. What is that thing below hydrogen? And you say, no, it's too dense to be perceived. Like, bullshit.
But there is ultra low frequencies, even though we cannot hear it.
Yes, but
there's ultra low frequencies, and that's what I'm saying.
That's where your analogy broke down, Terrence.
No, because hydrogen sits in the same exact position as carbon does when you're looking at it.
No, it doesn't.
It doesn't come off at the same coloration. It doesn't have the same tone.
Terrence, you're talking about a periodic table from like 1926.
Tone, coloration, octaves, it's pure insanity. Elements are not frequencies, they're not sounds. Eric calls bullshit, but he doesn't explain why. Hydrogen has one proton in the nucleus. One. You can't have fewer than one proton in the nucleus of an atom, or you don't have an atom. That's the point. That's the answer. That's the explanation for why Terry is wrong that every 10th grader should understand. And he doesn't say it. Because Eric has bigger fish to fry.
Pull up the Neil stuff on that I prepared on that page. Because I cannot believe how disingenuous this is. He calls you the worst insult in academics, which is... There was a study called Dunning-Kruger effect. Is both an effect that is studied and the ultimate insult. It's basically your mama.
Yes, Eric doesn't like how Neil politely told Terry he's a complete moron with no idea what he's talking about. But Eric has offered a similar sentiment throughout this conversation. So what gives?
This is Neil deGrasse Tyson, just so you don't feel bad about yourself, talking about me and my theories based on a question in an Ask Me Anything. Will you be able to talk to Eric Weinstein about the new theory of geometric unity? This is from 2013. We are all wondering about that. Cosmos is not your normal talking head documentary. In fact, it's the feature of the original that enabled the series to live for an entire generation beyond the shelf life of hundreds of other science documentaries that came afterwards. So the answer is no.
Ah, it all makes sense now. Eric is butthurt that Neil mocked his ideas just like he did to Terry, because in the end, Eric's work is a giant turd too, just with much better turd polish. He is rejected from academia because his ideas are garbage, hence the anti-academia rants, which are responsible for his rise to popularity among the science-illiterate general public, and his acceptance by contrarian club leader Joe Rogan.
More or less, from what I can piece together, Ghislaine Maxwell's father, who started Pergamon Press, destroyed...
Jeffrey Epstein's Ghislaine Maxwell?
Correct. He figured out how to destroy science and make a fortune by blowing out the number of journals and forcing every university to subscribe to every journal that he could figure out how to publish, because to not subscribe to all of the journals required an admission that you had an incomplete library. So he diluted the quality of the editorship of the leading journals.
And we have reached the Jeffrey Epstein conspiracy portion of the show. For those of you who watched my video debunking Formscapes, you're familiar with this Robert Maxwell script, and it's idiotic. He was one guy at the top of one publishing house, and he did not have unlimited power in shaping the publishing world. Peer-reviewed primary scientific literature remains the only respectable way to share scientific findings, and we don't need to dwell on this pathetic anti-establishment script that is the central grift of any charlatan like Eric.
So what you're saying, though, can I just summarize this? What you're saying is that Neil deGrasse's understanding of peer review is flawed.
Sure.
And that it is not really available to someone like Terrence.
It really isn't. He knows that.
Of course it's not available to Terry. He's a science-illiterate moron who can't construct a coherent sentence. His rants are so stupid that they would get an F as a 6th grade science project. So how could they get published in a prestigious journal that is reserved for educated, hardworking people who do science for a living? But again, Eric has to pretend that this isn't why Terry can't get published. He has to project this image of the ivory tower and the elites that don't like the uppity black man who is making waves with his brilliant insights, because that's what serves his own grift. This is the precise reason that Eric should not be the one in this room right now.
Now you look at what Neil said about your stuff, and by the way, he's right about 1 × 1 = 1. You're wrong about that. That was your opener. You picked a terrible move. On the other hand, you heard what I said about the linchpin. It was a combination of bath water and baby. I do not have any economic or authoritative interest in taking anything that you've done and putting it under my own name. I am simply here to help you. And when we talked about the angle and all this stuff, I can tell you that that's a great idea. It may have been had by somebody else because I don't know, but I assume it comes from you.
Of course he didn't do it. He held a contest to get someone else to build his drone for him. And what was it that he wanted to do with them?
So I was trying to reach out to Elon Musk. I was trying to reach out to Jeff Bezos. because my main goal was I was building these to clean up the upper atmosphere, all of that debris that's up there, and ultimately to mine the asteroid belt.
Yes, a drone that moves by propellers which push air is going to fly around in the vacuum of space and visit the asteroid belt. Great thinking, Terry, but it doesn't matter. Eric is building up to his big payoff.
In my field that I care about, for 40 years we've heard this unbelievable trope that only the string theory people are doing real work and everybody else isn't. And it's total hogwash. And there's no way we can get out from under these people. In the case of Anthony Fauci and Jay Bhattacharya, I was just with Jay Bhattacharya in Italy. You'd invite Tony Fauci and Jay Bhattacharya.
Oh, for sure.
Yeah. We can do any of that.
I bring garlic.
Yeah.
We could have Michio Kaku
And
in
some
here.
crosses on the wall.
Let's have Michio Kaku and Brian Greene. Let's have a discussion about string theory. Let's fundamentally discuss neoclassical economics. Shall we discuss whether or not random mutation is the true engine of neo-Darwinism? Is that reasonable? Or do some of these crazy people who say, I don't know what it is, but random mutation isn't powerful enough to build proteins because stability is too difficult?
String theory, bad. Fauci, bad. Neo-Darwinism, bad. All the anti-establishment, electric universe, anti-vaxxer, creationist, sympathetic fanboys just climaxed in their pants. Everything from a real institution is wrong, and every contrarian is right. My debunks always mock this sentiment because it's the only thing these frauds ever say.
We've lost everything. And podcasts, as dippy and shitty and as variable in quality as they are.
Yes, they vary in quality, and this is a bad one, for reasons I won't belabor for a third time.
The thing that pisses everybody off is the fact that I have the models behind what I'm talking about. When I talk about when we describe the electric field or the plasmic field, I've got models that define every aspect of that motion, and I'm waiting for it to be reviewed.
I will assure you.
Yes, it pisses people off when you say that, because no, you do not have that. You do not have a model. You do not have anything that does anything like what you're saying, and you don't even know what any of those words mean. That's why people are annoyed by you, Terry.
But Terrence, you know what he's saying about not being an expert and teaching, and then coming from the outside, and that it's insulting. It's insulting. It's insulting. It's a bad way to approach a concept, because the people that have been studying these concepts for so long instantaneously are told that they don't know, but you know, and that's offensive to people that are actual experts in a thing. I think the same ideas could be portrayed in a way that does not do that.
I have to learn that nomenclature.
It's just you're so much smarter than most of the people you're talking to.
No, Terry is not smarter than almost anyone he meets on a day-to-day basis, but he thinks he is. That's the problem. Joe has it in him to admit that other people actually study and learn things, and Terry just says that he needs to learn the nomenclature, basically admitting that he doesn't even understand the words he throws together, but they all just move on pretending that Terry isn't stupid.
There's a creative spark and a spirit in you that I really see and appreciate. It comes from an older era, and we don't have people like you in the academy anywhere. We used to have lots of these polymaths who would connect fields. And right now what we've got is a specialization epidemic.
There is no specialization epidemic. You have to specialize in order to contribute to the advancement of science, because we already know so much. There will never be another Da Vinci. That era is gone. Being a generalist is only useful for science communicators like me who want to explain as much basic information as possible, because we have to point out many different holes that people are digging into the body of potential knowledge. Generalism will no longer allow you to dig a deeper hole than what's been dug, because everybody is miles deep into the abyss already.
The funny part about it is that that's the midwit's end point, is that they see heterodox thinkers and they can't figure out how to place them. And so they just say, if I can find one error, I can reject everything.
Terry isn't a heterodox thinker. People aren't desperately searching for one error. Everything he says is an error. He is an error factory. Eric is bending over backwards to blame academia for unjustly rejecting Terry, because that's the boogeyman that Terry and Eric have in common when they preach.
And you keep triggering that, and that's
with
why
the
you are
one times
where you are.
one, but that's why I keep saying the 1 times 1 is more of a metaphor.
It's not a metaphor to us. It is life and death. You try to sneak 1 times 1 through airport security. It's like, it's just a Glock 19.
I understand that, but it was really to gain the attention.
They never do it.
To gain the attention.
Listen, you didn't know, and now you know.
Well,
anyone want to take any bets as to whether Terry will officially admit that 1 times 1 equals 1 from now on? Somehow I doubt it. But let's give Terry one more slap on the wrist.
To what was the name of the university? South Carolina University.
Yeah.
I was working with Apollo diamonds. We were growing diamonds, And I had developed a way in which to grow diamonds larger than the 2-carat diamonds. I went over to South Carolina University and I talked to them about introducing the diamond process, into their university. They were going to give me an honorary degree.
Okay.
Now, I'm thinking they're giving me an honorary degree in chemical engineering because of what I'm doing. And it's just an honorary degree in humanities that they gave me. And so I went on the show and I was like, yeah, well, I got an honorary degree from them. But that ended up coming across as if I got an honorary degree in chemical engineering, which I don't have an honorary degree in chemical engineering.
Assume you did. An honorary degree
is worthless.
It's like, would you take, if your child needed brain surgery, would you go to Dr. Dre?
No.
Okay.
This is just pathetic. Terry was given an honorary degree, which is worthless, but he presented it as an actual doctorate in chemical engineering. He knows he's being called out, so he offers this total fabrication about diamonds to act confused, as though one can get a doctorate without taking classes and doing real research at an institution. Then Eric mocks him, and again, rightfully so, but in doing so, we expose the hypocrisy in figures like both Terry and Eric, who pretend to rage against academia while simultaneously presenting themselves as experts based on academic laurels. In Terry's case, it's a lie. He never even went to college. He's as uneducated as they come. In Eric's case, it's true. He does have a doctorate from Harvard, but that's where this story breaks down. If academia is truly so corrupt and worthless, then so are the degrees they distribute. If the degrees mean something, then there is value in academia, and disparaging these institutions as corrupt and limiting is meaningless. You can't have it both ways.
QAnon can't be total bullshit because it's got some core in it that's right and some craziness. If you think about Dianetics and Scientology, the first thing that they teach you about is the reactive mind. That's not a terrible theory. And then before you know it, it's Xenu and volcanoes, right? So what's going on is that people are not aware of how kayfabe works, right? Wrestling is one of the most dangerous, demanding sports of a certain kind. Now, it happens to be theatrical and pre-programmed. But if you've ever dealt with anybody, like the wrestling community suffers a death rate unlike any other sport in the world. What you have to understand is that kayfabe, and I highly recommend you look at my essay from 2011, is about what happens when fantasy and reality intermingle. And that's what you did on the last time that you were here. And I can talk to you about the fantasy, I can talk to you about the fraud and the lies, but I'm also going to talk to you about the contributions, the genius, and the insight. And what I want the world to learn is you're getting sucked into mass delusions that you're not properly imagining. There's almost always a core of truth and reality that the mainstream won't acknowledge. And then there's almost always a bullshit payload that gets leavened in because in some sense the mainstream is our official cult. And then all of the rest of us produce these other cults. And in my situation, I've gone 40 years and I haven't had a really deep conversation about GU, geometric unity, with my own community. Where you are is that you're in a world in which the number of people who are both competent and honest and ethical enough to have the conversation with you is dwindling to fewer than 10.
This is the summation of Eric's entire identity. He is positioning himself to appear above Terry, which he is, while simultaneously manufacturing some kernel of truth in Terry's ramblings that isn't there, in order to pretend he is unjustly mocked by academia. This serves only to bolster his own narrative of being overlooked by academia, because his theory of everything is a pile of crap just like Terry's insane ramblings. He simply is able to package it in a more appealing way because he understands math and Terry doesn't. And all of this is happening on Joe's show because his show has become self-aggrandizing intellectual pornography for people who like to pretend they understand complex topics, but don't. In the end, despite Eric's motives, perhaps the world is slightly better for him having outright stated numerous times that Terry has no idea what he's talking about. And yet somehow, from what I've been able to gather, Terry fans seem to feel vindicated by this episode. The fact that anyone, Terry or his fans, can walk away from this conversation without having learned anything is a gigantic missed opportunity. One thing we know for sure is that he certainly won't be shutting up anytime soon. So there you have it, my assessment of the mixed bag that was Eric and Terry on Joe Rogan. No matter what the configuration of guests, this show never really seems to reach any logical resolution, but maybe we will get there one day. Until next time.